Welcome everyone, Byron White here, the CEO of Writer Access, Chair of Content Marketing Conference. Happy to be with everyone and with Bill. Bill, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to be here with you. First of all, I want to thank you for coming to visit our offices about a month or so ago. That was really nice of you to swing by and say hello.
I had to see the global headquarters of the content marketing experts in the world. So yes, I was happy to come swing by. It was fun.
Indeed. And it was, of course, great to be on a stage with you as well at Content Marketing Conference. And we'll look forward to having you back next year if you're available, and getting things moving in the right direction with regards to educating people, which is what we're going to talk about today. So you're going to talk with us today a little bit about driving the digital path to purchase. How we shift and move and migrate is perhaps a better word, hopefully not like slow penguins, from content to conversion. And this is a particularly interesting topic for me, Bill, because that's really the science of what we're trying to do. It is no longer about eyeballs, it's about conversions. So we're going to have you walk us through the good news and the bad news, most likely, as we progress forward. Just a few notes for everyone before we begin. First of all, the good news, this webinar is being recorded. I can almost guarantee that I will have somebody coming in a little bit late that will put a text out, put a question out saying, well, is this webinar being recorded? That's always a good sign, but I'm convinced that somehow we need to convey or communicate that better with people. But yes, this is being recorded and everyone will get a link to it. What I'd like for you to do is to pop in your questions as they're happening live. I may interrupt Bill and ask a question if it's about a particular slide, if I think it's worthy of an interruption. I also might fire a few questions into the webinar just to add some spunk and make it lively, and shake Bill up a little bit with an interruption to make it a little bit more fun. To make it more fun and interactive and put Bill's wisdom to the test. We'd love it if everyone would share the love with hashtag #RightOn. And you can, of course, reach Bill and myself with the hashtags there. Everyone knows me, but if you don't, I'm the CEO and founder of Writer Access. I'm a glutton for speaking. I enjoy surrounding myself with smart people like Bill to pontificate and to debate and to try to sort out and figure out what's next and what's new with content marketing. So let's see, Bill. We'll let Bill introduce himself in just a second with a 6 to 12 minute introduction and promotion. Just kidding. But Bill has really a great and interesting background and is doing some great work at TreePoint that he's going to tell us, I'm sure, a little bit about. So do stay in touch. But without further ado, I'm going to change the presenter mode and shift things over to Bill, the star of the show today. So without further ado, drum roll, please. Bill, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Byron. Sorry, I wanted to make sure that everybody should be seeing the intro slide. And what I wanted to do is, in addition to this being recorded, sometimes people just want the slides themselves. And I promised Byron that I would post this. So if you want to go to tradepoint.com/content marketing conference, CMC, you can download the entirety of this presentation. And it's no registration or anything like that. So just feel free if that's something you're interested in. So thank you. This original presentation was designed to be presented at the Content Marketing Conference. And for those of you who attended my session, we actually had some really great insights that sort of came up based on some conversations I'd had at Shop Talk. And I had like some just off the presses information I wanted to share. And so that's what I did at that particular conference. But I made a promise to Byron. I said, look, we put all the work into putting this presentation together. I'm happy to do this as a follow-up. And so that's what this one is the digital path to purchase and how to use content to drive commerce. So I'm really excited to be talking about that. I am the CEO of TreePoint. We are a digital marketing agency. I'm not really going to do a pitch here on our services or things like that, but I just want you to know that I work day in and day out with a lot of clients, helping them do exactly what we're about to show. So I'm not just talking about this in theory, I'm talking about it in practice and what really works. So I think we can all agree that being a marketer in 2016 is harder than ever. Some stats that I always like to use in these presentations: 90% of Americans ignore digital advertising. And when I started my career in 1994, building the very first commercial websites for AT&T, MasterCard, and CBS, we were getting 44% click-through rates. Now it's 0.04%. So how the mighty have fallen. It's no wonder that people are struggling with banner ads and trying to make them effective and pay out. We've also got $7.2 billion of estimated global losses due to bot fraud, and 40% of ad revenue is lost by websites that target millennials due to their ad blocking. So the bottom line is we don't control the customer journey anymore as marketers if we ever did, right? It's certainly not happening now. And that customers still want to hear from brands. They just don't want to hear from the advertising side of it or the brands themselves, right? So that means specifically that consumers want to hear from other consumers, and they want to talk to influencers and opinion leaders. So just a few more stats, and I'll dive right into it. 62% of people trust brands less, according to PricewaterhouseCoopers. 32% would trust strangers more than brands, according to Forrester. And a whopping 73% wouldn't care if brands disappeared, according to the Meaningful Brand Study. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you specifically how content drives commerce. And this was actually a case study that was released right around the time of the Content Marketing Conference in partnership with Nielsen Catalina Solutions. And if you don't know Nielsen Catalina Solutions, they're the retail arm of Nielsen. And so essentially what Catalina does is they do at the checkout, they actually monitor purchase behavior. And they have partnered up with Nielsen so they can provide end-to-end reporting. And you'll see why that's important in a minute. This program, the case study that I'm going to share with you, it comes from White Wave Foods, and so they were looking at, can content actually drive in-store purchase behavior? And that was their question. And so this really, the case study here shows what their discovery and findings were. What they did was they chose 258 top fitness and food influencers to essentially send content out that is very relevant to those people who would be purchasing White Wave food products. And no surprise here, the content itself can take the shape of blogs, it can take the shape of videos, it could be even something as simple as a recipe. But in all cases, we had the asterisks with the full FTC disclosures as regulated to say that this was paid content. And as you can see, what's really interesting about this is that all of the content was delivered through social networks and specifically through the influencers that we'd engaged, and no additional paid content was, no additional distribution was used to pay to boost this content. And that's important because I think what we all find as marketers is that, when brands are looking to sort of produce content, it's that you have the cost to produce, and then you have the cost to promote. And as Facebook keeps increasing the tolls that they charge to even reach the audience who've already decided they want to hear from you, it just becomes more and more cost prohibitive. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a few slides. But these are examples of the content, being able to show what that looked like for White Wave Foods. And then on the back end, this is our partner Tap Influence, and Tap Influence is a platform that helps us manage the relationship with our influencers. And so what we can see in this is actually, the number of influencers, what they're actually doing, what kind of content they're pushing out there, and how effective it is. And that's something that we didn't have, when I started doing my very first influencer marketing campaign in 2008. It was all, basically talking directly to individuals and, doing deals with those individuals and not really having much tracking or measurement other than what that actual influencer would provide me as the marketer. And that was challenging. So now what we actually can see is in real time what specifically each influencer we've engaged is doing, and then what kind of response they're getting based on the content that they're pushing out there. And what's really great about that is that in this particular study, the same targeting pixel that we use to track and measure the effectiveness of the content itself in terms of what it's doing, that same targeting pixel was then used by Nielsen Catalina Solutions in order to be able to see those number of people who saw influenced content versus those people who made purchase decisions at retail. And why that's so important is because this was the crossing of the chasm. Up until this point, we could absolutely track and measure effectiveness of content and from an e-commerce perspective, right? So if someone was going to buy online, say through Amazon or through an e-commerce store that we can manage or control, we could see end-to-end if content actually was driving sales. this was the first time that we were able to then connect it back to a loyalty card at retail, and specifically make those connections from the content that all the way through to commerce, actual transactions at physical retail. And so that way we were able to say, okay, so of those people who were exposed to the content we were putting out there, how many of those people actually made purchase decisions? And so Byron, you trying to interrupt?
Yeah, I just want to ask
No,
you
okay.
one quick question, Bill. Your
Sure.
audio is a little choppy. I'm wondering if you could do anything to help rectify that.
Not sure. I'll slow down a little bit, and I'm on a landline, so it shouldn't be cell phone related. So good.
Okay.
Keep me honest. If it's chopping up, I apologize.
It's a little better right now, so let's go with it
Okay.
and hope that some pipes were
Love
cleaned.
voice over IP technology. So that's probably what it is. All right. So as you can see, these incremental sales, what we are able to do is sort of track and measure what is the actual campaign from the start of the campaign, what would be the normal course of action, and what's the purchase history of the control group. And the control group are essentially those people who were not exposed to content and specifically would be buying White Wave Foods products anyway, versus those people who had been exposed to this content and what were they actually doing from a purchase behavior perspective. And so now you can start to see what that differential is. And the point of difference here is that they were getting about a 10% bump from those people who had seen influencer content versus those who had not. And so they were making more purchase decisions. And that by itself was cool. But what really got interesting was that we could start to do some predictive methodology and say, hey, for every 1,000 people viewing influencer content, they were generating $285 of incremental sales. So White Wave Foods could then go back and say, wow, the more we actually push out influencer content, the more we can directly affect our sales bump at physical retail. And that's why, Lori from White Wave Foods says this blows traditional advertising results out of the water, because they were finding that this was anywhere between 11% high, 11 times higher return on investment, or 16 times higher than their best digital marketing efforts previously. And what's really fascinating for us is what happens beyond the campaign. So, during this actual study, we were really looking at the delivered number of impressions and engagements. We saw that this continued on long after the program had ended, which is different because if you think about traditional advertising, whether it's banner ads or, any type of search engine marketing campaigns, when you pay for advertising, the minute you stop paying for it, the campaign ends. But with influencer content, the influencers are posting that content and it lives on long after the campaign has ended. So in this particular program, got an additional 2 times the additional impressions post-campaign. So that means once the actual campaign ended, we were seeing double the amount of delivery than what was promised. And we assume, of course, that the continual sales would continue to go through and that these sales results were not actually even accounted for in the study. So that's what's fascinating to us. If you look at it on the left-hand side with posts going live, this is your typical advertising campaign in the sense that you've got sort of a crescendo, a peak, and then things sort of fall off. But you have this extremely long tail of that content well after this campaign had ended. In fact, one of the things that was fascinating in terms of the research was that there was this organic bump that happened in February long after the program had finished in November. And it turned out that that was due to the Super Bowl. So people were looking for vegetarian options that they could send to the recipes and things that they could actually make for the Super Bowl parties. And suddenly there was a huge organic spike in the content for White Wave Foods. And so that actually gave them better performance based on the influencer content in that area long after the actual program had ended. So the key takeaways in terms of the study was that influencer content can drive incremental sales and dramatically outperform traditional advertising. The long tail effect of the content creates continually growing return on investment even after the program has ended, and that customers will respond to content presented in the right context. And that's really important. That the difference here is that if the content is relevant, it's coming from a trusted source like an influencer, somebody people are already following, then we know people will respond to it. And part of this, we started saying, okay, well, so why? Why is this happening? What's going on? Why is it suddenly that we're starting to see content that's driving commerce, and some does and some doesn't? And I think, we started to really research and dig deeper into it, and we found a very specific answer, because we're moving, as an industry, from one of transactions to relationships. And this shouldn't surprise anybody on the phone. We've been really focusing on the value of content for quite some time. But the interesting thing is that it really is a critical transformation in business, and not every business has really got there yet. Meaning, when you're focusing on transactions, you're focusing on winning the sale, winning it now, advertising, promotions, incentives, short-sighted immediacy rather than long-term intimacy, right? Transactions processing is really where most brands have been since the 1950s. But it's not even like we're here, we've moved beyond, and at this point now, we're focused more on relationships. That's winning the hearts, winning the minds of your customers forever, developing that connection, understanding their preferences, and then delivering that experience. This is a longer term focus with more loyalty at sort of the back end. And the currency has changed too, because when you're dealing with transactions, you're looking at dollars, right? So everything is dollar, dollar, dollar. How can I make as much money as I can this quarter so that I can basically say, hey, I hit my numbers, right? That slowly starts to migrate into time. The time that your customers are spending with you is much more valuable. But ultimately, if you look at the top companies in the United States today on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange, you're looking at companies like Google and Facebook, and these guys are raking in billions of dollars, and you ask yourself, well, I've never bought anything from Google, I've never bought anything from Facebook. Right, see, because you are the product. Your personal data is basically what people are buying, and essentially that is the change. The currency is no longer about money, it's about personal data, because if I know who you are and I know what you like, then I can sell to you all day long. It's really the effectiveness of the content based on knowing what the audience wants. And so that really brings us to the next part of this presentation, which is the customer journey. So the customer journey is really understanding the various touch points, from discovery. How do consumers discover their brands? What is the activation strategy? What is the actual transaction strategy? And then what is the final advocacy? These are the 4 parts of the customer journey, and content plays a critical role in each area. So content is going to be how consumers discover a brand. It's going to prompt activation. It's going to essentially, from that activation, if you play your cards right, the content can help drive the transaction process. And ultimately, where most brands stop short is it can actually drive advocacy. Because as Peter Drucker used to say, the purpose of business is to get customers. But today, the purpose of business is to get you customers that get you more customers. And so effective content can help drive that advocacy at a level that actually makes it easier for marketers to be successful. So this is about journey mapping, right? And sort of designing exceptional experiences, examining from the constituent's perspective the best means of engaging, interacting, and addressing the mental, physical, and emotional journey through all stages of that relationship lifecycle. And so it's about the path to purchase. It's no longer characterized by this linear marketing funnel. I mean, this is what we used to think about in terms of, well, we're going to basically cast a wide net. We're going to get everybody and anyone and then sort of filter them down to the final transaction. Well, now can the customers move from one channel to or touch point to another, and they switch their devices to suit their needs. So it's not one linear path. And then understanding the different journeys that customers have with the organization and the emotional responses is critical to really delivering an effective customer experience. The content that drives commerce today understands the needs of the audience at the moment they are in that sort of journey, whether it's a discovery moment, whether that's an engagement moment, whether that's a transaction moment or an advocacy moment. That's the kind of content that drives commerce. So why does experience matter? Customer experience leaders obtain returns up to 77% greater than their marketing investments than those who give it little importance within the overall market approach. So think about that. If you're a customer experience laggard, you're down 33.9% from the S&P, stock index, right? Versus those people who are leaders are getting a 43% higher return just because they're focusing on the actual experience. And yet, less than 30% of companies actually map their customer journeys. Less than 30%. That means if I were to take a poll on this phone and ask how many people actually map their customer journeys, you would find that you're either in that 30% or the 70% more likely, right? But people who basically never even stopped and said, what does my customer want at what different times, when I'm thinking about content relative to each stage. And that's the critical piece of information here, is if you've mapped your customer journey, then you know what kind of content to develop because you know what their needs are at that point in the life cycle. So let's get some specifics. Let's get right into each one of those areas. Discover, right? So customer behavior, it's pretty obvious that most 93% use public search engines as the initial point of information discovery. It's pretty straightforward. If you have a question and you want to get an answer about a particular product or service or just solving a problem, Google is your friend. You go in, you type in a search, and you determine whether or not that someone has an answer to the problem you're trying to figure out. Then usually about 88% of the time, you then go one step further and you go to a social channel, and you'll basically say to Facebook or Twitter, and you'll say to your colleagues, hey, thinking about solving a problem doing the following, and you'll talk about a product or service, and you'll get feedback, right? 70% of customers then say that customer opinion is the most trusted source of their information. So even if I find the content on Google and I go to my social network and say, hey guys, what do you think about this? The war is won or lost right there when your friends say, I love it or I hate it. Do it, don't do it, right? That's what's happening right then and there. So then if the friends on your social network don't have an opinion, then what ends up happening is typically customers will go to some sort of a support forum or discussion group and say, hey, you know what, maybe you guys aren't specifically in my network, but you guys seem to be experts about the thing I'm trying to solve for. What do you guys think about this? And as you can see, in all of these places, great content will make a huge difference, because if people can reference an article or a blog post or a video they've seen, that's going to come up in all these areas, right? And here's the most important statistic. 58% of consumers will publish their brand product experience to, quote unquote, protect others from a similar experience. And what that means is basically if you had a really bad experience with a brand, you're going to post and talk about it because you're like, do not under any circumstance make this purchase for this reason. Here's my terrible experience, and if someone had told me about this, I would have never done it. And as a brand, you want to be looking out for those proactively, because that's your opportunity to turn it around, and sort of make it right. Because if you don't, then that stays out there forever and it's hurting your sales. You don't even know it. So let me give you an example. So we did some research here to find out sort of in the bread category, what are sort of like the most important, sort of metrics to help us understand how relevant a particular brand is. And so we said, well, who's winning in the organic bread category? So 90% was coming from Dave's Killer Bread, which is great because his content was amazing. Specifically, Dave's Killer Bread here's a guy that's got a fantastic story. The guy literally went to prison, right, for a non-violent offender, came out of prison, decided to turn his life around, but actually instead of trying to sweep under the carpet his prison time, he actually embraced it, hired all these, reformed prison inmates, because it's one of the hardest things to do is even if you've served your time, it's really hard to get a job and be a productive member of society afterwards, and created this amazing organic story about sort of how these sort of prison inmates all came together to create Dave's Killer Bread. And it's a fantastic story, and it's a great product, and it completely crushes the other folks in that category, Eureka Bread and Orwheat, right? But here's what's really interesting, because the people we were talking to was not Dave's Killer Bread. It was another group that was trying to really expand their place in the marketplace. I said, look, here's the entire story. Dave's Killer Bread is only 14% of the conversations going on about organic bread. So guess what? There's 85% uncategorized virgin territory that we could go after there. And the majority of conversations about organic bread is totally up to us. So we can basically use content to drive commerce. And even though today Dave's Killer Bread is crushing it, there's a wide open field for us to basically be much more relevant to this audience that nobody's talking to. And that's the key, understanding this is their discovery process. If you want to be more relevant, put out the right kind of content that helps you get discovered, especially when you have such a wide open field like this where 85% of the conversations are not brand specific. And one of the things I like to talk about is sort of this idea of how social media drives sales to retail, because you've got pre-store considerations. That's what we've been talking about within specifically social media. Then you've got near store, which is really understanding like, hey, when someone's contextually relevant and I want to drive content in, I can use content through mobile devices that are when someone's like right outside of a retail store or right, in a place that I know that they'll be able to sort of transact with me. So that's fantastic. And then in store, you probably heard a little bit about this, but in-store beacons are starting to transform the industry, because now we can actually use beacons to connect with people's mobile devices throughout their in-store shopping experience. And as a retailer, we can actually introduce new products, new ideas. But here's for everyone on this call, we can introduce new content and actually say, hey, did you hear about this? Or here's a recipe, or here's something of value that I know will help you enhance your shopping marketing experience. All of this is all part of the discovery process. So now I want to move to the next piece, which is activation. So we think about activation. Well, here's the thing, if you truly listen to your customers, you have a much higher chance of engaging with them. I'll tell you, I'm a huge fan of Trader Joe's, and they've capitalized on market trends such as better for you and healthier options by listening and engaging with their core customers so they can get ahead of demand. And so when people say, hey, I love Trader Joe's, but here's what I didn't find on this shopping trip, or I'd love it if they had more organic vegetable soups, then Trader Joe's goes great. And they go out there and find various different products and services that meet the needs of their customers. They're able to seem like such an incredible retail store because they listen and they engage with their audience, both physically in store and through social media. So if you actually tweet out or you engage with Trader Joe's, they're going to basically acknowledge and respond to you, which makes you as a customer feel really great. They also share content about sort of recipes and other ways to leverage what they provide in store. And I think what's interesting is, you've got very, very clever content for things that you normally wouldn't even think about. So, for example, how do you tell your story in an extremely cluttered environment? Twix has a little tweet out that says, hey, if a Twix bar, breaks in the woods and nobody's there to hear it, does it still taste delicious? And it's just funny and it's interesting, and sort of it gets you thinking about candy in an otherwise, crowded environment. And everybody talks about the Oreos dunk in the dark. This was during the Super Bowl in 2013, just acknowledging that Oreos was on it when we had a power out and suddenly everything went dark. There was a few minutes with the Super Bowl where there was nothing happening, and it was basically a total blackout. And Oreo was on top of it, and they posted, power out, no problem, you can still dunk in the dark. That tweet completely overtook all the other advertising conversations through the entire Super Bowl. Think about that for a second. If you want to do a 30-second spot in a Super Bowl commercial, it's a $5 million piece for each 30-second spot. And with one tweet, they completely changed the entire conversation. Everybody during that Super Bowl broadcast was talking about this one tweet, and they continue to talk about it for the next 3 months, how brilliant it was, how incredible it was. I mean, this was the talk of the town, right? So this was an engagement strategy. Oreo knew that people were sitting there confused and saying, what's going on? And suddenly they could find a relevant message that really hit the core. We actually did a program with Sutter Home where Sutter Home was like saying, hey, we've got an issue because women who are our target audience would love to bring Sutter Home to dinner parties and to book groups and things like that. But, our brand is such that it just doesn't feel like, because it's a lower end purchase, they're a little embarrassed to show up with a bottle of Sutter Home and share with their friends, even though it's their favorite wine. What can you do about that? And so we said, let's challenge accepted. Let's make a Vine video that makes it fun and engaging, and here's what we came up with. And that totally worked, right? It was a simple idea, but it was basically, how can we use content to drive commerce? Well, we found a stigma online. The stigma was, love Sutter Home, love to drink it, but it's sort of my thing that I sort of keep to myself. I don't typically share it. Here was an opportunity to say, hey, I've got some really cool drink recipes that you can use with Sutter Home. And because this wine is a little sweet and it's sort of, something that has a different flavor profile, people can actually go out there and be proud to bring Sutter Home into a book book group or within their groups, because it wasn't just a straight up wine, here, I'm delivering you a bottle of wine. It's like, hey, I've got a really cool cocktail recipe I want to share with you, and this is one of the main ingredients. It completely solved the problem, and sales went up. It was awesome. And I think one of the things that's important is finding the right metrics, right? You don't want to get distracted by engagements that, measurements that are out of context. An engagement doesn't equal sales. So you can think about like, well, we've got all these great impressions and these awesome click-through rates and banner ad views, Facebook like, Twitter followers. Awesome. You put little kittens and puppy dogs on any post and you're going to get those things. It doesn't necessarily mean that content drives commerce. It has to be relevant, and we have to be able to back it up from sales. So in the next section, I'm going to talk to you about how we do that. This is about transactions. How do we transact with the customer? So the sales metrics are the most important metrics to focus on. So let's work backwards. Let's look at our return on investment. How many sales did our content produce? How many codes were redeemed? How many loyalty program registrations? How many coupons were redeemed? What are their particular rebates for proof of purchase? These are the metrics that matter. And as a sidebar, we have the ROI of social media that if you go to my Twitter handle, which is just twitter.com/Bill Carmody, it's my pinned tweet. It's at the very, very top of the page. No registration, but it's the ROI of social media. If you really want to understand the kinds of metrics we're talking about here and how to basically measure the effectiveness of your social campaigns, download that ebook. It's totally free, no registration required. But what it does is it sort of helps you understand why most brands can't effectively measure the ROI of their social campaigns and what to do about it. Because the thing that's interesting here is customers spend an average of 23% more when they have an established emotional connection with the brand versus customers that do not. So you want to have those established, experiences. And the other thing that's interesting is you want to blend tried and true tactics with social campaigns. So the average redemption rate for coupons is between 1 and 10%. These are for FSIs and any type of coupon distribution strategies that are traditional. But when we get a coupon redeemed through socially driven campaigns, we're seeing this redemption rate as high as 68%. And it just, when you think about that, it just completely blows a lot of these traditional metrics out of the water, because you're taking tried and true tactics and you're blending them with the best content strategies, and you're winning. One of the greatest examples I can give is Coca-Cola, right? Their Share a Coke campaign redefined how to use social media, because they launched this campaign totally through social, no television advertising initially, and then only when this thing completely blew up, then they started supporting it with television and other campaigns. But it was so simple. Share a Coke. That was their whole strategy. Put your name on the packaging, and then people would then do it in social media. Here's the thing, guys. Coca-Cola's sales were literally flat for years until this campaign, and they actually boosted their sales by 10%, all content driven, right? The content was tell your story about how you shared a Coke with somebody else, and it was completely organic, and it drove all kinds of engagements. But those engagements led to sales. So here's the last and most important section, which is advocacy. This is where most businesses fall short. They go, woohoo, we got the transactions. We took our content and we drove commerce, awesome, but now we're done. No, you're not done, because if you can just go one step further and create advocates of your best customers, they will produce even more content that actually drives even more commerce, right? So it's about creating raving fans. As I said earlier, today the purpose of business is to get you customers, to get you even more customers. That's advocacy. And most businesses don't understand how to create raving fans. Creating raving fans of your product is about doing more than they could ever reasonably expect for you. So how are you blowing your customers away? It's not a rhetorical question. If you can't answer today how you're blowing your customers away, then you're probably not. And so it's a matter of sort of thinking about what's that surprise and delight? What do I need to do to go even further? So I'll give you an example here. One of the things we did with Patak was, they had a great brand in the UK. They were coming to the United States, and what Patak is basically Indian sauce. And if you are from either the West Coast or East Coast, you probably had Indian and you probably like Indian. But if you're from the Midwest or anywhere that's besides sort of the major metropolitan areas on the East and West Coast, Indian food is not nearly as popular as, say, Italian, right, or even sushi. And so essentially what we were trying to do is how do we actually expand the market by creating advocacy? So what we did is we empowered our existing fans to throw house parties. right? So to throw a dinner party, basically you would get, a kit that we would send you. It would help you with, coupons, offers, recipe ideas, and give fans everything they need to host an Indian-themed dinner party, right, to their close friends and family. So essentially, it was a glorified sampling program that was being done by our core audience, but we made them look like heroes, right? And of course, we got over 11,000 people engaged through this grassroots advocacy program. And these are people who were really pushing out, hey, if you've not tried Indian food, come to my house and be my guest. We had hundreds of thousands of people that basically were interested in talking about this stuff out there, and so many people that we actually were able to touch directly from this campaign, which was like really just a core set of net new customers. And what we were able to do from an ROI perspective is then not only give out free, packages from the actual campaign itself, but also this sort of declining value coupon strategy where, you get the free product the first time at the grocery store, then you get a $2 off, then $1 off, then 50 cents off, and we could track and measure how many actual people went all the way through to the end and what the continuation of the product purchases were, right? So that's just one example. We've got many more, but I just, for the sake of time, I'm just going to take us through this last piece, and we'll open it up to Q&A. So I'll tell you now, if you haven't submitted a question to Byron, now's a good time to be thinking about questions you want to ask me, and I'll finish this up. So customer journey mapping, it does not matter what the actual format of the customer journey looks like. There's lots of ways to sort of look at each phase from that initial discovery to engagement to transaction and advocacy. And you want to look at sort of what is the path that most of your customers take. And what you're really looking for in this is the moments of truth. Where are they really expecting you to step up based on either their engagement with you or an expectation of the product you're delivering or sort of what happens at each stage of the process. And those are the places where you want to spend a little extra energy figuring out how do you surprise and delight, because these are the critical decisions that are being made throughout the customer journey. This is an example of one that we did for Miller Genuine Draft. And the reason that I'm sharing this one is because nobody in the history of the world ever woke up in the morning and said, I wonder what's going on Miller Genuine Draft's Twitter page, right? It doesn't happen. No one cares about this brand, except what people do is they come up and say, hey, I think I want to go out tonight and celebrate with my friends. Where should I go? And so it was a redeployment of energy to say, don't just sort of talk about yourself and beat your chest and say how awesome we are. Thinking about how do we engage the audience with what their needs are, and their specific needs were, hey, where's the cool party tonight? Where should I go? If I'm going to go hang out with my friends this evening, where should I spend time? And we mapped that journey to help make sure that we were providing additional value from, here's the club scene based on what's going on in your local area. Here's directions how to get there, geo-targeted campaigns for people who are relevant, and then the next day following up with them and say, how did you like it? What was your experience? It was a great way to sort of take them through end to end and really have these connected experiences that were relevant on their terms. So the key here is to design your content strategy to drive purchase, right? So fill a void for your ideal customer. Define the problem that your product solves in your content. Then share alternative solutions, including but not limited to the use of your product. And then ensure the content places the needs of your customers ahead of your own. This is critically important. Nobody wants to hear how awesome you are as a brand, right? What they want to do is they want to hear how you solve a particular problem that customers actually have. And then if you're going to have content that drives commerce, you want to include a clear call to action. So provide that clear next step for your customer to solve their problem. Buy now is not always an appropriate call to action. Sometimes it's like offer something of value to help them along their journey, and differentiate your content by factoring the lifetime value of your customer in that initial touch point. So think about what next step you want them to take, and more importantly, think about what next step they're likely to need to take in order to continue down the journey from their perspective. And then lastly, ensure that your content's measurable. Define key performance indicators up front and understand that you have secure stakeholder buy-in. Everybody who's participating in this, they're all clear about what the KPIs are and how you're going to measure the effectiveness. Then map those KPIs to the customer journey and include those measurements that are tying specifically back to sales. How do you know if your content's driving commerce? If your answer is we don't, keep working at it, right? There's always a way. If you want to know if your content is driving commerce, work backwards from the sales process. And then invest in compelling content. I don't need to tell you guys on this phone call because you guys are all content marketing experts. Create that content that's so insightful that customers want to share it. Leverage your partners, industry experts, and other third-party advocates. Enable others to distribute published content on your behalf with no incremental cost. And then build social triggers into the content, recommending how they share, etc. We are in a new relationship economy. We have moved from transactions to relationships. And so you got to ask yourself these 3 questions. Do you care about your customers when they've not transacted with you? Do you care enough to really get to know them? And do you care more about them than you care about their money? If those answers are correct, you're going to be focusing on relationships. This is how we evolve to technology mastery. This is a constant willingness to change. I think what's important about that is this idea that you're not just working on your current business, but the business you're going to become. You think about Uber and they disrupt themselves all the time. You think about Apple and Steve Jobs is famous for saying, you got to be willing to eat your young. He cannibalized a very profitable business of MP3 players to create the iPhone, but his iPhone is so much more powerful than just any MP3 player that he previously created. That willingness to change is going to help you keep out in front, because if you don't, you fall behind. So if you have an unending willingness to learn, you're going to always be out in front. You got to have the courage to invest the time and money and an accurate future vision, like what's coming next, and that wisdom of that human and technology balance, really bringing it together in an effective way. According to the CIO of Dell, the customer experience is the next competitive battleground. According to Forbes, by 2020, customer experience will overtake price as the key brand differentiator. And Gartner is saying by this year, 89% of companies plan to compete primarily on the basis of customer experience. So I want to say thank you guys for hanging in with me. I really appreciate you guys giving me the time, and I am now going to open it up for Q&A. Or I should say Byron will do that for me.
Thanks. Let's get to a few questions that I have initially here, and then I'll circle back with some questions that are filing in. Number 1, how much coffee have you had today?
1 cup. That's all I had. And normally I have 0, so that's 100% more than I usually have.
Having been around you, Bill, I will validate that. You are full of energy, my friend. Thanks for all of that. I have another interesting question. What software did you use for your presentation? I loved the animations. Very interesting.
Sure. So that has nothing to do with me. That has everything to do with our creative director, Brian Delatorre, in our Kansas City office. He uses Keynote, and I used to always use PowerPoint presentations from Microsoft, and it's fine. That's sort of a good enough technology. Keynote takes you that one step continue on where you can do cool animations, integrate video, graphics, and things like that.
Very good. Customer journey, great topic, and customer experience, of course, tied in with that. Do you know of any software that could help people create a customer journey?
I don't, and I'm sure if we do a Google search, there may be some software out there. I don't even know that you need it, because honestly, if you have a whiteboard, the best technology in the world is a pen, because seriously, it's between your brain and your thinking. You can sort of lay it out and just say, okay, I'm going to take the 4 segments and say discovery and engagement and transaction and then advocacy, and then what you start to do is map, what are they looking for? In the discovery process, what are they searching for that our brand solves? Right? And you just ask yourself those questions and you put it together. The design of the actual map itself is really that it's trivial. It helps you basically put it together in a concise way. So I'm not discounting the fact that there's work there, but the real value is thinking it through and doing some sort of a whiteboarding session. Figure that part out, and then basically you can pretty it up with Visio. I mean, frankly, you don't need a really great technology platform in order to do a customer journey map. You just need the right brains in a room talking about each of the various different areas of the customer journey.
Do you feel that the design and call it, contextual development of a customer journey could become a product, if you will, that your agency and or individual freelancers, content strategists, for example, could sell as a solution?
Yes, absolutely. I will tell you that we typically embed that engagements with our clients today, but we absolutely could do a standalone, and I'd be happy to work with you to figure out a way to make that accessible to everybody who's on the content marketing side, because I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, we're very interested in that in the newly launched content strategist, and you and I talked about that over lunch anyway.
Yeah,
Customers
love
need
it.
it. Customers need it. They want it. What kind of time frame and cost would you estimate off the ballpark, off the top of your head, to really dive into a customer's, marketing team, learn about their needs, gather with them, huddle with them, ask and fire off a bunch of questions that would be built into the plan? And of course, remember that, as you said a few minutes ago, that exercise alone of having people think through the answers to the questions that you would ask them is half the point of doing the customer journey,
Right.
to understand that empathy and, of course, present it back to them. But do you have a thought on how that could work, Bill, and what the cost
Sure.
would be?
At the risk of having my team sort of slay me after this webinar, I'll tell you my thoughts here. Basically, I'll tell you that we've seen it range, and it's going to be quite a range, and I'll explain why in a second, from about 5,000 to about 50,000. And let me tell you the difference. A $5,000 engagement is, get in the room, do a whiteboarding session, and just sort of bring the smartest people together to sort of go through and do the map itself. It's like a half-day workshop that you just knock out, right? So to me, that would be like the value of just putting it all together from that perspective. The $50,000 version is all of the research that leads up to that meeting, and that's the real difference, is that if you've really done, for example, social media listening and understanding not what do you think, but what do you know? And that's the difference, right? If you put a lot of people who just, hey, I believe it's this, I believe it's that, you have a lot of great opinions, and you can put, having a customer journey based on opinions is 10 times better than not having a customer journey. But having a customer journey based on fact and is 100 times better than that, right? Because basically you already can prove. You're not guessing at that moment. You're saying, look, we did the research, and here's what we know. People are looking to solve this problem at this phase of the journey. And so that's why a more comprehensive study, it's not about the workshop, it's what leads up to the workshop. Does that answer your question?
It does. Just another quick one from me. In your opinion, what's the best way to extend the length of the tail, if you will, from content so it continues to perform long after it's first viewed?
That's a great question. The answer to that I would give is you don't have to do anything from the influencer side. The influencer content is going to have a natural long run rate based on their posting and people searching for it after the campaign is finished. The way you extend that even further is by repurposing the content, meaning taking it as a brand, taking the content that your team has pulled together and then putting it into your own content calendar. And that's something that's often overlooked because the content being developed and pushed out by influencer networks typically is hanging out there on its own, which has tremendous value. But then if you know the content's performing, why not pull it back into what you're doing and actually even support it with some additional paid media? I hate having to pay that toll at Facebook, but at the same time, if I've got high performing content that I know is driving commerce, hell yeah, I'm going to take that in, and I'm basically going to pay the toll for Facebook to get it to reach to my audience and push it out even further. So the more you can take that really high performing content outside of your network and bring it inside the fold, the more effectiveness it's going to be, and the more it's going to even drive commerce further for your company.
To max the journey, ooh, I like that phrase, by the way. To max the journey, how do you reach influencers? Do you view influencers as a separate campaign, a separate effort? Even when you say create a book, do you want to reach out to your inner circle or a super juicy, beefy content asset that you spend a ton of time on? Do you pre-release it to your group of influencers and get their thoughts on it? Do you use your influencers at content, heaven forbid, as what we call ego bait? What's your take on ego bait and bringing in influencers into the content assets?
So a couple things on this. Number one, when the case study I showed you for White Wave Foods, that was with our partner Tap Influence. And so those were paid, engaged influencers that we brought into the campaign and pushed out their content. And they developed the content that got pushed out through their networks. What's different about what you just suggested is there's another type of influencer that a lot of businesses have cultivated, which is, they're best advocates. They invite them into the inner circle. So, these are people who are essentially content and corporate champions. And in doing that, what they essentially are doing is they're saying, hey, we know you're already talking about our brand on a regular basis. Why don't you come into our inner circle and we'll give you content before it's released so that you can be part of our trusted network. And that works really well. It's just that sometimes those folks that are really advocates for your brand don't necessarily have those large established networks, so you don't get quite as good of an echo chamber effect. But it does work. And to your point about sort of validation, yes, I think before you do anything, I think you want to have that validation step where you say, hey, this is the content we're thinking of putting out based on our customer journey mapping that we've done. What do you guys think about this? And that can either be the influencers that you've engaged, or it could be sort of this opinion poll group that you've potentially pulled together from your best customers. But either way, it's silly not to check, because it's an easy step that you can then say, if something's off, let's fix it before we sort of really push it out hard.
Bill, you work with big brands. Lee wants to have you step off the pedestal for a second and reach down into the smaller local professionals that,
sure,
that need these principles. You know, $5,000 would be a lot of money for an SMB generating only $1 million to $5 million in revenue to invest into a content, you know, to a customer journey, a document, if you will. You know, how can these, you know, philosophies, you know, be applied to the creation of content on a smaller scale?
Well, so two things. Number one, you know, I think one of the challenges, I mean, every business starts out as a small business, right? And I think we can agree that, you know, the difference between when you're, you know, in $1 million in revenue versus 5 versus 10, you have these sort of strategic leaps. And oftentimes it's about what investments are you willing to make for the outcomes that you desire. So before I move off of I'm going to answer your question directly, but let me just make one counterpoint, which is, you know, if truly knowing your customer all the way through end to end, from discovery through advocacy, is going to help you break out of the challenges you faced as a business, then I would argue that $5,000 may be the cheapest thing you've ever invested in, because you're not wasting money on content that doesn't produce results. And I only say that because I think this is where most businesses struggle, is they get wrapped around the axle saying, you know what, I know that other businesses are producing content that's driving sales. Why doesn't mine? Right? And so essentially they've spent all this money tied up in, you know, hiring writers and content producers and all this wonderful stuff that should produce results, but because they haven't taken the time to put that strategy up front, oftentimes what they're struggling with is they don't know what content to produce, so they're doing it based on sort of best guesses. And again, I will step down from that sort of stage and say, yeah, let me get one step deeper and sort of do a do-it-yourself approach here. But before I do that, I felt sort of say there's an alternative viewpoint to what you was just brought up. So Lee, basically what I will tell you is that first and foremost, you can do this 100% by yourself. You don't need anyone, right? So the first and foremost thing is you can actually go through and just go through what you believe to be the case. And just taking that exercise is about time, not money, right? Going through that process, you will then go through your own discovery, which is like, yeah, you know what, I really haven't been answering these questions that my customers have, right? That's one strategy you could easily deploy. A second one is to sort of look at who are your best customers, the people that are actually buying from you on a regular basis. Interview them, talk to them. They want the love, right? And so even if you can't afford to do a comprehensive research study, or you can't go out there, you know that at some point if they've bought from you, you have some level of contact information. Use that contact information to invite them in. It's like, look, I want more people just like you. Help me go find them. Right? And have that conversation, because people love to have their opinions, you know, known, and they just nothing else. Just by listening to that customer and saying you matter to me is going to help you deepen that relationship with the customer. So the thing in life, you have time, you have money, right? So if you don't have the money, then use the time. The time is the place where you can go and spend more time focusing on the stuff that matters. If what you're doing today isn't delivering the results you want, don't keep doing it. Switch, take a time out. Think about what you need to do differently in order to get those results. What do you think, Byron? Did I answer the question?
You did. And here's another small investment that someone could make. Bill, have you read the book from Brian Solis called X, The Experience When Business Meets Design?
I have it on my bookshelf, and I have not read it. So it's on my list of things I'm going to read this fall. But yes, I've heard of it. I've heard it's really good.
Yeah, it is amazing, and it is a complete documentary of how to approach and think about and craft this art of the customer journey and crafting an experience. The other thing to also focus on with that last question, well, you know what? Let's go to this next question because I think it applies too. A question from Bruce related to how is this form of content strategy, including the social media component, applicable to B2B paths? You know, example, a digital agency whose customers are. Right. Example is a digital agency whose customers are local SMBs, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I guess there's two ways to answer that question, and Byron, I'm going to ask you to clarify, and if Bruce, if you want to text or help make sure I'm taking you down the direction you want to go. There's the strategy of helping the SMBs with their customers, in which case all of this directly applies, right? So that's one path we can go down to answer that question. But I think what you're getting at is how do I attract more SMBs? If that's correct, give a hell yeah or no to Byron so I can make sure we're answering the right version of that question. Because B2B marketing is obviously different than B2C, and a lot of what I've focused on today is B2C. And partly that's because we're further ahead in the B2C marketplace. The B2B side of this is ripe for the picking, and I'll tell you that all the same strategies apply, but it's a matter of we're a little bit less known territory because there just haven't been a lot of B2B activities around this sort of content that drives commerce. But let me tell you something, it totally does. And what it comes down to is you just have to say, my customer is not the end customer of my SMBs, but how do I attract more of those SMBs themselves? What are their pain points, and how do you help them? And how do you help them attract them into your agency? And so from that perspective, it's really a matter of what content do they require that you can then deploy. Does that make sense?
It does, and Bruce got back to us and says, yes, that you're spot on there. And the question was how to attract SMBs as clients.
Yes. Okay. So here I'm going to give you a secret. One of the best, easiest ways to do it, especially for local clients, is hold a free, like physical, in-person conference. Now, the next best thing is what we're doing right here, right now with Byron in terms of the webinar. I'm a huge proponent of webinars, but the thing is, add value first. If you want to attract a boatload of SMBs, put together a free conference that everybody can attend, and you basically get the word out there from your SMB market and say, I'm going to teach you how to drive more customer acquisition. I'm going to help you basically do exactly what we just talked about today, right? And what you do is you bring everybody into the room to help them understand what they're not doing. And in doing that, they're all going to want to work with you because they're going to look at this and go, I need that guy on my team helping me attract more business. And so it's really a function of basically, create a really compelling offer as part of that workshop or that conference. But, the thing about it is that most B2B companies, most agencies don't go as far out as they need to in terms of attracting new business. An easy thing to do is to hold your own webinar or even hold your own physical event. That's the best thing to do, and attract those ideal customers in, have those conversations. And frankly, if you don't quite have the budget to do something like that, the next best thing is go to the Chamber of Commerce in your local area and say, I've got some awesome things that are going to help everybody in this Chamber of Commerce. Set me up, and I'm going to basically talk to all the heads of state. And they will do that because they have guest speakers every month. Just get on the freaking calendar, right, and share exactly what you know.
We sense your frustration for people not perhaps listening to you on your point here, but it is hard. Not everyone has the energy or the ability to go teach and educate. It's asking a lot for CEOs, for example, to step off the management bandwagon and start educating people and caring about their interests and talking to their customers. But you know what? The more we talk about it, Bill, the more people are going to listen. I would add only two things to that question. First of all,
sure.
in my pathetic world of thinking about marketing, I do not distinguish between B2C and B2B. They're both really the same to me. They're people that have something to offer, and they're people that want to potentially transact and buy those things that you're offering. So it's all the same. It's just different language you need to speak. Mm-hmm. You need to articulate the messaging and the value proposition differently. And most importantly, because these two things are united in my mind, there are two words, I think I mentioned this to you, that really stand out with the reason that Writer Access has grown from 0 to 22,000 customers in 5 years and made the Inc. 5000 list for the last 5 years in a row. It's not because we're great and we don't boast these things like that. You know what we do? We surprise and delight our customers perpetually. right?
Yep.
We mail them copies of the 3 books I've written with a forthcoming away just because we can. Because if somebody signs up and makes a $7 transaction, we mail them a $12 book. You know, we surprise them. We surprise them. You know, we
Great.
literally lose money on customers. We invest in their relationship. We speak with them about
but
new
you
upgrades
don't.
and
Hold on.
technology.
I have to correct you on that one point, and that one thing I'm going to correct you on is that you don't lose money. You lose money on the initial transaction, but you've basically then converted a transactional-based client to a lifetime value. What is the lifetime value of that customer? Yeah, it's not $7. You know what I mean? Like, you sent them a $12 book for a $7 transaction, and if you were only measuring the transaction, you would say, like, we're going to go out of business with this deal, right? But if you know that your lifetime value is much, much greater, which you both, I know you know that it is, then it's just that it's a short-term investment for a long-term relationship, and that's the way we all need to be thinking.
Knowing the aim is advocacy, customer advocacy, we need to change how we think about it, and that's where surprise and delight come in. I don't believe someone's going to recommend Writer Access unless we've truly exceeded their expectations with the quality of content we delivered, and a big and, we've delivered surprise and delight along the way. Right? And those are the key things. It can't be a description of your services and fulfilling that obligation. No, that is not a surprise and delight. It needs to be something that is not on your website, that you're not promoting, that you do, that becomes this catalyst for advocacy, which is what we're all trying to aim for with everything we do.
I think what's really interesting is, you know, I had a conversation with an executive at a major soda company, and I won't say which one it is, but you know, they were talking about sort of you know, surprise and delight, and like, well, every time they open our you know, our product, you know, that's the surprise and delight. It's just amazing. I'm like, no, that's expected. Let me be clear about this. You know, when they buy your product, they drink it because they know what to expect, and that's all they're getting. You know, but if you want a surprise and delight, you have to go like 10 times more. So they buy 1 can of soda, but they get access to something that they just never would have expected. And that is essentially what Coca-Cola has done with their My Coke Rewards program. You know, you buy a Coke, you get a Coke. But when you actually see the code, and that code sort of unlocks free content, access to VIP, backstage things, I mean, it's like, wow, that's adding that surprise and delight. You don't even know what you get with that actual code when you have it, but you know it's something cool. And that's the same thing across the board. It's like, you know, you expect, when I pay for United to, you know, on an airline ticket, I expect to get good customer service from gate to gate, right? To be able to get on my plane. And I know that's a tall order these days, but it is what I expect. Now, the thing is, those miles that I get as part of that flight, that's not even surprise and delight. That's just expected now too, because, right, that's a loyalty program that I'm expecting. But when I get that free upgrade that I wasn't expecting, that's surprise and delight. You know, Mr. Carmody, we really appreciate the fact that you're a 1K flyer. You fly with us all the time. We're going to put you up here in first class, which is a much more expensive ticket. That's surprise and delight. That's why I fly United every time, because they do that for me free. Same thing, you know, it's like when you get sort of any type of upgrade, any type of, hey, I know you didn't ask for this, but I gave it to you, Byron, to your point about giving that free book, same thing. Like, you didn't order a book, you got a book. You ordered some content and you got a free book because you just want that relationship to go on. That's exactly what we need to be doing. It's not your service, it's what you do above and beyond your service that matters.
Empathy, you know, to quote Anne Hanley, is also very important. We need to understand, you know, the buyer's perspective. You know, what do they want? What are their needs? I don't just mail a book. I mail a book that addresses their pain points and problems that I wrote. You know, so and that is harder in the B2B world. You know, a lot of the B2B world has a complex problem in that typically a business owner marketing to other businesses wants to talk about their business, right? So we need to understand that the true, you know, fundamentals here, and that is that forward-thinking companies are starting to think like old-school publishers, gathering ideas, developing stories, and publishing a steady stream of content that engages their customers and keeps them coming back for more. So that's becoming slow. I think we have like a 30% penetration in the marketplace that with people, business owners, B2B owners that believe that philosophy, but certainly it's an uphill battle because 70% of the companies have not made that transformation. This is good news for writers. A lot of great content needs to be created out there, guys.
Exactly.
So figure it out. You know, figure it out.
And again, the simplest answer to what you just said is less about you, more about them, right? And if you're writing on behalf of a brand, it's not about helping the brand beat its chest. It's writing it based on the perspective of what do the customers need to hear in order to basically be endeared to that brand, right? What is the problem the brand solves? What is the pain point that the brand can actually alleviate, right? And from that perspective, you're not writing about, hey, this brand is awesome because it alleviates this pain point. It's like, I get you. I know that you have this pain point, and here's what can be done about it. And oh, by the way, this brand supports it, right? It's a different mentality. It's a different shift. But it makes all the difference. When someone is looking at content, if the content speaks to your heart, they're going to read it and they're going to share it and they're going to participate in it. But if it's basically just a glorified ad, forget it. It doesn't go anywhere. It just flops.
Listen, it's been great having you with us. We're out of time today, Bill, but per usual, I want to thank you for raising my adrenaline and my blood pressure with your high energy level, and B, for a fantastic presentation today. Thanks much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Byron.
Right on. Tune in next month, everybody, for another killer webinar. We have actually the next 2 or 3 months and some really special guests lined up, so thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll see you next month.